Reading today from this work right here. With this is Marxism and the National Question from the collected works of Comrade Stalin, Volume 2, published by Iskra Books, which, by the way, you can go to Iskra Books and get them all for free. The hell, my computer just started to update without my permission. Don't do that. Stop that. Oh my god. Okay, so we've been reading from this here. I have the page number copied, actually. Well, we read a bunch of this yesterday. So we started this yesterday here from... This was written between 1912 and 1913. It's called Marxism and the National Question. This is really like what Lenin defers to when he's talking about, as we learned last time, when he's talking about how to define the nation and about national liberation struggle. He would constantly say defer to Stalin, who wrote at length about that. And then we learn about how the nation is defined, etc. So we are on now part 3, presentation of the question of the national question, that is. So here we go. From Comrade Koba, or potentially K. Solon. Presentation of the question. A nation has the right to freely determine its own destiny. It has the right to arrange its life as it sees fits, without, of course, trampling on the rights of other nations. That is beyond dispute. But how exactly should it arrange its own life? What form should its future constitution take? If the interests of the majority of the nation, and above all, of the proletariat, are to be borne in mind. A nation has the right to arrange its life on autonomous lines. It even has the right to secede. But that does not mean that it should do so under all circumstances. That autonomy or separation will everywhere and always be advantageous for a nation, i.e., for its majority, i.e., for the toiling strata. The Transcaucasian Tartars, as a nation, may assemble, let us say, in their diet, and succumbing to the influence of their beys and mullahs, decide to restore the old order of things and decide to secede from the state. According to the meaning of the clause of self-determination, they are fully entitled to do so. But will this be in the interest of the toiling strata of the Tartar nation? Can social democracy look on indifferently when the beys and mullahs assume the leadership of the masses in the solution of the national question? Should not social democracy interfere in the matter and influence the will of the nation in a definite way? Should it not come forward with a definite plan for the solution of the question, a plan which would be most advantageous for the Tartar masses? But what solution would be most compatible with the interests of the toiling masses? Autonomy, federation, or separation? All these are problems, the solution of which will depend on the concrete historical conditions in which the given nation finds itself. More than that, conditions, like everything else, change, and a decision which is correct at one particular time may prove to be entirely unsuitable at another. In the middle of the 19th century, Marx was in favor of the secession of the Russian Poland. And he was right, for it was then a question of emancipating a higher culture from a lower culture that was destroying it. And the question at that time was not only a theoretical one, an academic question, but a practical one. a question of actual reality. At the end of the 19th century, the Polish Marxists were already declaring against the secession of Poland. And they too were right. For during the 50 years that had elapsed, profound changes had taken place, bringing Russia and Poland closer economically and culturally. Moreover, during that period, the question of succession had been converted from the practical matter into a matter of academic dispute, which excited nobody except perhaps intellectuals abroad. This is, by the way, this particular part that we're dealing with here relates to why a lot of us in why a lot of us indigenous Marxist Leninists disagree with the idea of like balkanization or the breaking up of territory, and in fact think that the revolutionary movement, the democratic revolution that precedes socialism, I should say, has to include the expanding, because like not only are we economically tied to other nations that way, we need to improve relations like socially and politically and stuff amongst other nations, but even among the settlers as well. The progressive ones that we went over to our side, therefore, are like economically linked to us as well. We have to make their efforts serve the liberation struggle as well. As you know, like they're the cartoonish depiction that really what native people want is just everybody to fucking go back to Europe. You know, it it is funny. It's funny to think about, but you know, it's also not what native people actually want. Like we read in that book, they recognize that there's a special relationship there with the people who call themselves Canadians. They just want the people who call themselves Canadians to recognize that, whatever nation they're from, whether Mi'kmaq Nation like myself or Inuit or whatever, right? They just want them to honor that and be politically and economically like equal in their influence in politics and their say. Anyway, to continue. This, of course, by no means precludes the possibility that certain internal and external conditions may arise in which the question of the succession of Poland may again come on the order of the day. The solution of the national question is possible only in connection with the historical conditions taken in their development. The economic, political, and cultural conditions of a given nation constitute the only key to the question how a particular nation ought to arrange its life and what forms its future constitution ought to take. And also, see, Welbs, like for example, if we want to be stronger than the bourgeoisie, having a united America, as in, I'm not talking about the fucking USA. I'm not using USA as synonymous with America here. I'm saying all of America, including so-called South America, is meshed into like one country essentially. Then the ability to reverse that by the bourgeoisie would be nearly impossible, right? And that's a unity that they're not able to achieve, and in fact that they probably don't want to achieve. They would rather keep those divisions and perhaps even break it up a little bit more if need be. The economic, political, and cultural conditions of a given nation constitute the only key to the question how a particular nation ought to arrange its life and what forms its future constitution ought to take. It is possible that a specific solution to the question will be required for each nation. If the dialectical approach to a question is required anywhere, it is required here, in the national question. Do you think South America would want to join North America in a single socialist nation? Well, the socialist part might come after, right? I think I think part of the democratic struggle that would precede achieving like socialist, an actual established socialist nation here would essentially be that. Like part of the democratic struggle is is uh joining up with those progressive forces in the South, etc., right? Like that's essentially how the empire will have to become socialist in a sense. Like I know that's a bit third worldist of me, but that I mean that's why we have to focus on institution and party building here. Because as long as there is any super profits that imperialism can bring in, it will always use that to placate revolution here, to give people the illusion of an already existing independence when really they have no independence, right? And that illusion of independence, that false consciousness of independence, keeps them from understanding the need to struggle for real independence, which is why there's that disconnect between, in general, between the white worker and the native and the native worker, or even the native small proprietor, for that matter, right? That the that's there's that reason for the difference. But as we know, conditions are going to get worse, and that false consciousness will and can be rapidly shattered. That's the point that we're organizing for now. I think at the end of the day, it will be us in America and Canada who will be the last to join in that revolution. That's why I say, like, we need to participate in that democratic revolution that's already happening before we can have our own socialist nation. Because we treat South America as our backyard. So all those other nations, all those other countries in South America are already they're struggling against us, right? You know what I mean? So socialist Cuba, socialist Venezuela, socialist Nicaragua, etc., etc. They're going to keep expanding. They will join. They've already joined each other in this global revolution, and I would think that that goes northward in a sense. You know, in many ways, more of America. The labor struggle in America, in many ways, is more advanced than in Canada. I'm not gonna lie. Watch out for great North American chauvinism. Yeah, like and part of that is because of like, I mean, there's there's a the reason for that is not like because America is so much more, but there's a lot of colonized people in America. That's the reason for it. So America's labor struggle is like at another level, whereas Canada is, we'll probably like we would be pretty rapidly probably after the US or something maybe, but I think the US is going to be in more revolutionary turmoil than Canada will be earlier. And it'll kind of be like a spillover thing for Canada. Would be my guess. Right, continuing Stalin. In view of this, we must declare our decided opposition to a certain very widespread but very summary manner of solving the national question, which owes its inception to the Bund. We have in mind the easy method of referring to Austrian and South Slav social democracy, which has supposedly already solved the national question, and whose solution the Russian Social Democrats should simply borrow. South Slav social democracy operates in the southern part of Austria. It is assumed that whatever they say is right for Austria is also right for Russia. The most important and decisive factor is lost sight of here, namely the concrete historical conditions in Russia as a whole, and in the life of each of the nations inhabiting Russia in particular. Russia's or Stalin says, respect the Juche. Respect. Stalin literally just said, in case you didn't catch that, for those Juche heads in here, Stalin just said, respect the Juche character of the revolution. Listen, for instance, to what the well-known Bundist K. Koskovi says. Quote, when at the Fourth Congress of the Bund, the principles of the question, i.e. the national question,
Juche is what's happening on this planet, y'all,
were discussed. The proposal made by one of the members of the Congress to settle the question in the spirit of the resolution of the Sotslav Social Democratic Party met with general approval. C. V. Kozovsky, Problems of Nationality, 1907. And the result was, quote, the Congress unanimously adopted national autonomy. And that was all. No analysis of the actual conditions in Russia, no investigation of the condition of the Jews in Russia. They first borrowed the solution of the Sotslav Social Democratic Party. Then they approved it. And finally, they unanimously approved it. This is the way the Bundists present and solve the national question in Russia. As a matter of fact, Austria and Russia represent entirely different conditions. This explains why the Social Democrats in Austria, when they adopted their national program at Brunn in 1899, in the spirit of the resolution of the Sotslav Social Democratic Party, with certain insignificant amendments, it is true, approached the question in an entirely non-Russian way, so to speak, and of course, solved it in a non-Russian way. And the Brunn Paratag, or Congress of the Austrian Social Democratic Party, was held on September 24th to 29th, 1899. The resolution on the national question was adopted by this Congress, is quoted by J.V. Stalin in the next chapter of this work. Oh, Stalin is saucy as shit. I love that. I love that. He's like me for real. First, as to the presentation of the question. How is the question presented by Austrian theoreticians of cultural national autonomy and interpreters of the Brunn National Program and the resolution of the Sotslav Social Democratic Party, Springer and Bauer? Quote, whether a multinational state is possible, says Springer, and whether in particular the Austrian nationalities are obliged to form a single political entity, is a question we shall not answer here, but shall assume to be settled. For anyone who will not concede this possibility and necessity, our investigation will, of course, be purposeless. Our theme is as follows. Inasmuch as these nations are obliged to live together, what legal forms will enable them to live together in the best possible way? See Springer, The National Problem, page 14. Thus, the starting point is the state of integrity of Austria. Bauer says the same thing. Quote, we therefore start from the assumption that the Austrian nations will remain in the same state union in which they exist at present, and inquire how the nation within this union will arrange their relations among themselves and to the state. Bauer, National Question and Social Democracy. Here again, the first thing is the integrity of Austria. Can Russian social democracy present the question in this way? No, it cannot. And it cannot because from the very outset, it holds the view of the right of nations to self-determination, by virtue of which a nation has the right of succession. Even the Bundist Goldblatt admitted at the Second Congress of Russian Social Democracy that the latter could not abandon the standpoint of self-determination. Here was what Goldblatt said on the occasion. Quote, nothing can be said against the right to self-determination. If any nation is striving for independence, we must not oppose it. If Poland does not wish to enter into wedful lock with Russia, It is not for us to interfere with her. All this is true. But it follows that the starting points of the Austrian and Russian Social Democrats, far from being identical, are diametrically opposite. After this, can there be any question of borrowing the national question, the national program of the Austrians? Furthermore, the Austrians hope to achieve the freedom of nationalities by means of petty reforms, by slow steps. While they propose cultural national autonomy as a practical measure, they do not count on any radical change, on a democratic movement for liberation, which they do not even contemplate. The Russian Marxists, on the other hand, associate the freedom of nationalities with the probable radical change, with the democratic movement for liberation, having no grounds for counting on reforms. And this essentially alters matters in regards to the probable fate of nations in Russia. Of course, says Bauer, there is little probability that national autonomy will be the result of a great decision, of a bold action. Austria will develop towards national autonomy step by step, by a slow process of development in the course of a severe struggle, as a consequence of which legislation and administration will be in a state of chronic paralysis. The new constitution will not be created by a great legislative act, but by a multitude of separate enactments for individual provinces and individual communities. See Bauer, The National Question, page 422. And thank you, Rhyme. Appreciate that. Springer says the same thing. I think I can't really hear it myself, but I figure my enunciation is something like Ricky from Trailer Park Boys. Great legislative act theory. We have that in the US. They call it sewer socialism. I'm not even lying. It's true. It used to mean something else, but that's how they use it now. I am very well aware, he writes. It used to mean specifically sewer improvement. But now it's just like any kind of legislative act that's gonna eventually bring about the great socialism, and that's why we all must support Mamdanis. We must get 30 Mamdanis, 100 Mamdanis into the DNC, thereby transforming the DNC into an organization that will teach the masses about the limitations of reformism. I can see it now. Can't you see it now? I can see it now. Oh, wait, that might just be an acid flashback. My bad. Never mind. Sorry, comrades. I get those sometimes, you know? Took a lot of acid when I was younger, so sometimes you get those. I thought I could see it for a minute. Nope. That was just the side effects of a lifelong struggle of taking hard drugs. Anyway, allow me to continue. I am very well aware, he writes, that institutions of this kind, i.e., organs of national autonomy, J. Stalin, are not created in a single year or a single decade. The reorganization of the Prussian administration alone took considerable time. It took the Prussians 2 decades, finally, to establish their basic administrative institutions. Let nobody think that I harbor any illusions as to the time required and the difficulties to overcome in Austria. See Springer, same work, The National Question. He writes about it a lot. He writes a lot for a guy who doesn't know a thing about the national question, it seems. He should have read Stalin. He should have had dinner with Stalin. He should have been friends with Stalin. The reorganization of the Prussian administration. Sorry, I already did that part. All this is very definite. But can Russian Marxists avoid associating the national question with bold actions, quote unquote? Can they count on partial reforms, on a multitude of separate enactments, as a means for achieving the freedom of nationalities? But if they cannot, and must not do so, is it not clear that the methods of struggle of the Austrians and the Russians and their prospects must be entirely different? How, in such a state of affairs, can they confine themselves to the one sided milk and water cultural national autonomy of the Austrians? Milk and water, he says. This guy just said milk and water. I love that. I love that. The way. How, in such a state of affairs, can they confine themselves to the one sided milk and water cultural national autonomy of the Austrians? Yeah, you bunch of milk and water drinkers. One or the other. Either those who are in favor of pouring do not count on bold actions in Russia, or they count on such actions but know not what they do. Are you even lactose intolerant, huh? Oh god. Uh. You're clearly Germanic if you're not lactose intolerant. Oh, Stalin's great. By the way, if you want to read a Twitter, not to toot my own horn or anything, if you want to read a Twitter that probably that resembles Stalin, you follow Larry. I'm not saying this like in a great man theory kind of way, right? Because Stalin was just a guy. And if Stalin was in my position, he could just be like essentially a nobody streaming to 70 people on Twitter too, right? Like it just so happened that he was where he was when he was. So like I'm one Stalin tall. I got the Stalin freckles if you get close enough, which is why I rely on a shitty camera. You know? I'm one Stalin tall and go look at my Twitter. And you decide for yourself. Welcome back, K. Solon. Finally, the immediate tasks facing Russia and Austria are entirely different and consequently dictate different methods of solving the national question. In Austria, parliamentarism prevails, and under present conditions, no development in Austria is possible without parliament. But parliamentary life and legislation in Austria are frequently brought to a complete standstill by the severe conflicts between the national parties. That explains the chronic political crisis from which Austria has for a long time been suffering. Hence, in Austria, the national question is the very hub of political life. It is the vital question. It is therefore not surprising that Austrian social democratic politicians should first of all, in one way or another, try to find a solution for the national conflicts. Of course, on the basis of existing parliamentary system and by parliamentary methods. Not so with Russia. In the first place, in Russia, there is no parliament, thank God. Thank God we have no parliament. The words uttered by K. Kostovsky, the Tsarist Minister of Finance, later Prime Minister in the State Duma, April 24th, 1908. In the second place, and this is the main point, the hub of political life of Russia is not the national, but the agrarian question. Consequently, the fate of the Russian problem, and accordingly, the liberation of the nations too, is bound up in Russia with the solution of the agrarian question, i.e., with the destruction of the relics of feudalism, i.e., with the democratization of the country. That explains why in Russia, the national question is not an independent and decisive one, but part of the general and more important question of the emancipation of the country. The barrenness of the Austrian parliament, writes Springer, is due precisely to the fact that every reform gives rise to antagonisms within the national parties which may affect their unity. The leaders of the parties, therefore, avoid everything that smacks of reform. Progress in Austria is generally conceivable only if the nations are granted indefensible legal rights, which will relieve them of the necessity of constantly maintaining national militant groups in a parliament, and will enable them to turn their attention to the solution of economic and social problems. Bauer says the same thing. That was from Springer, The National Problem. Welcome, Sue. Yeah, yeah, which is exactly like he is for he's for fighting for the rights of nations, including the right of succession, right? But he would fight against, like, if in a particular nation succeeding would be like harmful to the proletariat, harmful to the masses, that even though he would be for that nation's autonomy, he would fight against that trend of successionism, and he would uplift whatever forces in that country were also fighting against the secessionism. Because as we know, right, no country is ever a monolith, right? Lasu, great to see you. Go follow Lasu. Right? That's why we always scoff and laugh at people when they say, "Go ask Ukrainians, go ask Cubans, go ask whatever," right? Go why don't you go talk to some fucking go talk to Cubans and their gusanos, you know what I mean? Like, have you even go listen to people from North Korea and they're talking about Yeonmi Park, right? That's why we like laugh at that, because you can find anybody from any community essentially that will like agree with you, especially if you're a hegemon and the status quo with the money and the power and the influence behind that, right? So, it's a way to say like whatever the forces were in that country that would oppose that secession, I would be uplifting them, because secession would not be in the interest of the proletariat. For example, like when forming USSR, right? Because USSR, being that whole, was better for the proletariat of all of those countries than Ukraine or anywhere else seceding from USSR. That would have weakened not only USSR, but would have also weakened the proletarian struggle in that country and perhaps left them open for overthrow. And the proof of that is how fast the empire went after Yugoslavia when USSR wasn't there anymore. And also how they had to break apart the USSR first before before setting back the revolution in Russia. Bauer says the same thing. National peace is indispensable, first of all, for the state. The state cannot permit legislation to be brought to a standstill by the very stupid question of language, or by every quarrel between excited people on a linguistic frontier, or over every new school. All this is clear, but it is no less clear that the national question in Russia is on an entirely different plane. It is not the national, but the agrarian question that decides the fate of progress in Russia. The national question is a subordinate one. And so we have different presentations of the question, different prospects and methods of struggle, different immediate tasks. Is it not clear that, such being the state of affairs, only pedants who solve the national question without reference to space and time can think of adopting examples from Austria and of borrowing a program? To repeat, a concrete historical conditions is the starting point, and the dialectical presentation of the question is the only correct way of presenting it. Such is the key to solving the national question. And now let's get down to the nitty gritty. Right, it could be easy to assume that succession and autonomy is good in every case, but is not always, and Stalin is right on the side of the proletariat. Yeah, and let's just and let's remember too, even when we're talking autonomy, right? We're gonna remember autonomy for who, and autonomy for the. Let's take Tibet for example, right? If Tibet were to secede, would that be better for the autonomy of Tibet or worse, do you think? Or Taiwan? Do you think if Taiwan were to fully secede, would that be better for the working masses of Taiwan or worse, right? Obviously in both cases we know it would be worse because they would both be splintered off, they would be weak, they would be without the military protection of China at that point in time, and they would be open if they weren't just Odin. If that act alone didn't empower the compradors in that country and it just became a vassal state from that alone, then it would leave them much more open to attack from the West. So even if it was a well-meaning, right, even the most well-meaning Tibet progressive person who fights for that autonomy that way, and thinks that it will come about by succeeding from China, they would be sorely mistaken. They would be given a harsh lesson when the US invades them so that they can gain a new market, right? Now no longer under the direct military protection of China. So we can imagine, like, in whatever case, for whatever moral reason, that would be objectively a setback for like the working people in Tibet. So that's why China doesn't support secession of Tibet. But they do support its autonomy. So we can't necessarily. I guess the question is we can't or what the point I'm trying to make is we can't necessarily think of those two things as being entirely synonymous, right? Autonomy isn't necessarily guaranteed by having seceded. And that's the most important question. Is the autonomy of the masses, because the nation should be the masses, right? Like, remember, we're not going to define we're talking from a working class point of view. So when we're talking about the nation, we're talking about the people of the nation. Do they support secession of Quebec as a nation? No, absolutely not. Quebec is fully integrated essentially now as a non-nation anyway, right? But like, yeah, no, absolutely not for Quebec. There's, in Canada in general, though, right? You know me, I'm for land back. I'm a land back Marxist Leninist. But when it comes to the United States and Canada, just like I said before, I don't support succession of like the Mi'kmaq Nation, even, because like for the same reasons. Like I don't think that would lead us to a permanent land back solution, for one thing, and secondly, yeah, as in like becoming a little small country all of its own. Like, I don't think that that's even possible. I think that our liberation struggle, the national liberation struggle here, has to include Inuit liberation, Mohawk liberation, Maliseet liberation, all the other nations, some of which inhabit the same territories as us, right? Like, because that's the thing about, that's why you can't. It's kind of like a settler mindset to think about like being able to cordon off nations into all of these neat little like territories, right? When really like nations, especially, nations as we understand them, but I would say like nations should not be understood as being able to be defined like that. Drugs coming right up, because like, look, this map is really illustrative of the point I'm trying to make here. Like, see, if you look at this map, you can see this is all the territories of America, right? See this? And you can see how many of them are overlapping. Like this here, the Mi'kmaq overlaps with Maliseet and Pesquexime and Abenaki, right? Cree overlapping with Anunakmu. Like this is why we have to rethink basically also our understanding of the nation in general. I'll do drugs. Okay, so this is why I'm saying, like, when I'm talking about I don't support the right to secession, it's just simply because it's like completely unfeasible. I will do the drugs. Calm down. I'm in the middle of explaining something here. Because this is the thing that everybody mistakes. Everybody always mistakes me saying like succession, like this, and this is kind of like what ACP has poisoned the waters for. This is why I try and point out that we can't go backwards, because not only do we have this here, right? If you look at these territories here, look at OFO, they travel, see? But you also have new people that live here. And I'm not just talking about the settlers. I'm talking about people who were forced to come here as well, that constitute other occupied nations, that will then also need to occupy territory on top of this. And then, yes, as well as settlers fight with us against the colonial systems and that colonial baggage, that imperial baggage is unpacked, new progressive forms of culture will emerge amongst them as well. And so they will constitute different nations existing within this whole thing also. So that's why I say, like, even with Russia, like, you got to understand, like, there's all kinds of different people, and they understood that as well when they were creating USSR. And in kind of the same way, America is similar in that sense. But not the ACP, they define this by just America, by the USA. But really, what we need here is a revolution to basically expand to include all of this. Because if you notice, a lot of these territories, like if you look right here at the Haudenosaunee territory, it obviously goes over both the US and America. So you can't like split. I mean, yeah, you could have different provinces, absolutely, but I mean that's something that will have to be worked out through this, right? But so that's why I say this when we say Cuba is the vanguard of revolution, like you can imagine it, right? They're the vanguard of revolution, and then their revolution spills over. Right now, like revolution is happening in Venezuela. Bolivia is struggling against the puppet regime that the US installed there, and that revolution could spread upwards. That's essentially what I'm saying, you know? That's the way I see it going, spreading upwards until it has a rapid change when it gets to the empire, because the empire is rapidly running out of super profits to placate those settlers who are currently encouraged to fight in their corner right now. Not that the revolution depends on them, but it certainly will be beneficial to many colonized struggles when we are able to win greater numbers of them over to our side. You know? Well, here's something that you can imagine. Imagine if instead of a host of nations, or sorry, other way around. Imagine instead of a house of Senate or whatever the fuck America's got, you've got a house of nations. And the nations can come together and able to talk about matters and vote on matters in some sort of democratic centralist forum type thing, right? You know, you can imagine how even that alone would be like a step forward in the democratic revolution. That like that would be a new type of parliament that would, instead of representing the bourgeoisie, would represent the nations. So that's why I'm always saying, like, it's not a matter of like, it's not a matter of going backwards, of balkanizing the US or balkanizing Canada. It's actually, we need the opposite of that, right? We actually need to come together. What we need to do is, yeah, we want a special relationship with as many groups, progressive peoples of Canada as possible, the settlers. We also want to improve our relations with all of these other nations and come together and be able to fight against those colonial forms of oppression in a more united way. Both things require that we are against the idea of secession at the end of the day. In fact, what we need is the opposite of a balkanization, you know? But I think here's what but I don't think any balkanization that happens will be along like these nations' lines, and that itself will cause contradictions. You know, like I think with what we're looking at with the U.S. is again, I think the U.S. various parts of the United States will be far ahead in terms of like revolutionary movement than Canada. Canada will be, I think, a response to vast portions of the United States being engaged in a revolutionary struggle, like a very concrete, a very frontline one. You know what I mean? I think that Canada is like way behind in that sense, in much the same way like UK is. Actually, we kind of like resemble UK in that way. Um, Now, I'm not saying it's not because like America's like so much better than us or something like this, but America has a lot of fucking colonized people and a lot of contradictions tied up in the colonial question. So I think that because of the vast amounts more of colonized people in the US, that's why labor struggle, revolutionary struggle, liberation struggle, whatever you want to call it, is more advanced there and will be more advanced there. In a sense, we have to look at them. What will happen there will, in a sense, like inform our revolution, right? Yeah, we that's what I think, RT. We will kind of like limp along until Canada really has nothing left either, right? We'll like suck off of Europe for a while, and then but then we'll see like things improving for people in the breakaway states of the United States that are now starting to come together to solve contradictions that were opened up during various segments breaking off and having revolutionary movements. But you know, that's all very far in the future, pie in the sky. We can't guess any of those things. What we know is what we need to do now. We know we need democratic struggle, and that's why I say about the House of Nations, right? That's a good like long-term goal, but achievable goal, in my opinion. No, great. This is exactly what I would prefer reading to be. I would like reading to be. If you hear something that we're reading that gets you thinking and makes you want me to expand on, please, by all means. Most of the work that I read on here, I am not reading for the first time unless I tell you. I've been studying Marxism for like 20 years or so. So a lot of works like I have read that a lot of works that I'm doing on here, I'm kind of like revisiting, and I that's why like I invite people to ask me questions. Other than like with the Century, which we're doing later, I have not read that before. Demon of Yodok, that was a first time reading for me. Yeah, yeah, very enlightening. All right, we've a comrade has redeemed the communist quote. My sound alert's not working again. I love that for me. I love when my sound alerts just break. And then they'll all come at once at some point. That's usually what happens. Sound alert's broken all day. It's not I mean it's not my fault. That seems like a Twitch thing to me. I don't see how I could.
One motherfucker for all motherfuckers everywhere. You know what I'm saying?
No, that one works. Friends with Stalin. No, there it goes. Okay, that one works. I'll have to go and plunge out the internet pipes. Okay, let's read for your communist quote. There, lovely Spladle. Tank tubing technical difficulties. Oh my god, did I show you the Dave one? After we're done reading this section.
Let's go. Smokes.
Dave has the most legendary technical difficulty you will ever see. And I will show you that after. I'm going to read you a short, for your quote redeem. This is a very, it's a very short but sweet one by Ingalls here. On the day when the thermometer of universal suffrage shows boiling point among the workers, they, as well as the capitalists, will know where they stand. Yeah, you'll want to stay tuned. I'll show you the most epic Dave technical difficulty I've ever seen in my entire life. Though I was laughing so hard when it was happening. I felt bad because when it was happening to him, I was like wheezing. I was laughing so hard I could not breathe. And he seemed very concerned. Not that I could hear that he was concerned because of the audio problems that he was having, but I could tell by the expressions on his face that he was concerned. He seemed distressed in the little picture that I could see him in. All right, I'll finish this section and then we'll see that as a treat. Okay. I love the way you read, Larry. It's very engaging. Well, thank you. That means a ton. I feel like I've come a long way. I think I was a lot more robotic before. I'm trying to do more inflection and like try and give a bit of like what I think the emotion should be. So I really do appreciate that because I'm autistic, so I was not always great at my tone. Most of the time people were like, "Why are you so angry? Why are you upset? Why are you annoyed?" And I'm just like, I'm not annoyed or angry. And I don't know what you mean. It's like, what do you mean? Reading every Thursday for 4-chord for a couple hours has really boosted my inflection skills. It takes a lot of practice. Yeah, I've been doing it for years now, offices, and I'm just now getting better at it. Because you think it's not just since I've been on stream here, but I've also been reading since the YouTube days. God. I'm glad y'all get it. It's been years of honing the skill of reading, which I think I'm only able to do or able to hone because I liked acting. I was a drama nerd. I was autistic, but also a drama nerd. As you can probably tell when we do video games in the morning. All right, next section. Section 4, Cultural National Autonomy. We spoke above of the formal aspect of Austrian national program and of the methodological grounds which make it impossible for the Russian Marxists simply to adopt the example of Russian social democracy and make the latter's program their own. Let us now examine the essence of the program itself. What then is the national program of the Austrian Social Democrats? It is expressed in 2 words: cultural national autonomy. This means, firstly, that autonomy would be granted, let us say, not to Bohemia or Poland, which are inhabited mainly by Czechs and Poles, but to Czechs and Poles generally, irrespective of territory, no matter what part of Austria they inhabit. I have not, but I would love to try that strain. That is why autonomy is called national and not territorial. It means, secondly, that the Czechs, Poles, Germans, and so on, scattered over the various parts of Austria, taken personally as individuals, are to be organized into integral nations, and are as such to form part of the Austrian state. In this way, Austria would represent not a union of autonomous regions, but a union of autonomous nationalities, constituted irrespective of territory. It means, thirdly, that the national institutions, which are to be created for this purpose, for the Poles, Czechs, so forth, are to be jurisdiction only over cultural, not political questions, specifically political questions which would be resolved for the Austrian parliament, the Reichsrat. It doesn't sound good, I'll give you that. That is why this autonomy is also called cultural. Cultural national autonomy. I mean, nothing against the Germans, but German does sound pretty scary, you know? No offense meant. And here is the text of the program adopted by the Austrian Social Democratic Party at the Brunn Congress in 1899. The representatives of the Social Democratic Party also voted for it. So this is that program we're going to be looking at. Having referred to the fact that national dissension in Austria is hindering political progress, that final solution of the national question is primarily a cultural necessity, and that the solution is possible only in a genuinely democratic society constructed on the basis of universal, direct, and equal suffrage. The program goes on to say, now I'm going to read you the program of Austria. The preservation and development of the national peculiarities of the peoples of Austria is possible only on the basis of equal rights and by avoiding all oppression. Hence, all bureaucratic state centralism and the feudal privileges of individual provinces must first of all be rejected. Under these conditions, and only under these conditions, will it be possible to establish national order in Austria, and place of national dissension, namely on the following principles. Austria must be transformed into a democratic state federation of nationalities. The historical crown provinces must be replaced by nationally delimited self-governing corporations, in each of which legislation and administration shall be entrusted to national parliaments, elected on the basis of universal, direct, and equal suffrage. All the self-governing regions of one and the same nation must jointly form a single national union, which should manage its national affairs on an absolutely autonomous basis. The rights of national minorities must be granted by a special law passed by the Imperial Parliament. The program ends with an appeal for the solidarity of all nations of Austria. From Verhandelungen des Bestrategiges in Brunn. Sorry if I just butchered that, which I know I did. It is not difficult to see that this program retains certain traces of territorialism. But that in general, it gives formulation of national autonomy. Perfect German I speak, as you can tell. It is not without good reason that Springer, the first agitator on behalf of cultural national autonomy, greets it with enthusiasm. See Springer at the national program. Hey, I try, you know? I don't claim I can get anywhere close to what it sounds like, but I will try to say the word. Brar also supports this program, calling it a theoretical victory. For national autonomy, only in the interest of greater clarity, he proposes that point 4 be replaced by a more definite formulation. which would declare the necessity of constituting the national minority of each self-governing region into a public corporation for the management of educational and cultural affairs. That's from the national question again. Such is the national program of the Austrian social democracy. Let us examine its scientific foundations. Let us see how the Austrian Social Democratic Party justifies the cultural national autonomy it advocates. Let us turn to the theoreticians of cultural national autonomy, Springer and Brauer. The starting point of national autonomy is the conception of the nation as a union of individuals without regard to a definite territory. Nationality, according to Springer, is not essentially connected with territory. Nations are autonomous unions of persons. Brauer also speaks of a nation as a community of persons, which does not enjoy exclusive sovereignty in any particular region. See the national problem from Springer and the national question from Brauer. But the persons constituting a nation do not always live in one compact mass. They are frequently divided into groups, and in that form are interspersed among alien organisms. It is capitalism which drives them into various regions and cities in search of livelihood. But when they enter foreign national territories, and there foreign minorities, these groups are made to suffer by the local national majorities in the way of restrictions of their language, schools, etc. Hence, national conflicts, hence the unsuitability of national autonomy. Territorial autonomy. The only solution to such a situation, according to Springer and Brauer, is to organize the minorities of a given nationality dispersed over various parts of the state into a single general interclass national union. And there you see what the problem is, don't you? And what did that class collaboration, that interclass national union collaboration lead to? Not good, right? Not good. Not good at all. Yeah. Yeah, you see, you're seeing the material basis of what is forming here with Austria, and this mistake as well, right? Such a it could have indeed, like a multinational union could have indeed been reached, but without actually like considering people who are potentially oppressed or working people especially, then then that national union can easily just become like a class collaboration, which is what happened, whereby the more dominant nation ends up just acting as the thing that all the other nations are subsumed into, the melting pot, as it were. Such a union alone, in their opinion, can protect the cultural interests of national minorities, and it is alone capable of putting an end to national discord. Hence the necessity, says Springer, to organize the nationalities to invest them with rights and responsibilities. This is all from those two works. Of course, a law is easily drafted, but will it be effective? If one wants to make a law for nations, one must first create the nations. Unless the nationalities are constituted, it is impossible to create national rights and eliminate national dissension. Brauer expressed himself in the same spirit when he proposed a demand of the working class that the minority should be constituted into public corporations based on personal principle. But how is a nation to be organized? How is one to determine what nation any given individual belongs? Nationality, says Springer, will be determined by certificates Every individual domiciled in a given region must declare his affiliation to one of the nationalities of that region. The personal principle, says Bauer, presumes that the population will be divided into nationalities. On the basis of a free declaration of adult citizens, national registers must be drawn up. Further, all the Germans in nationally homogeneous districts, says Bauer, and all the Germans entered into the national registers as dual districts will constitute the German nation and elect the National Council. The same applies to the Czechs, the Poles, and so on. The National Council, according to Springer, is the cultural parliament of the nation, empowered to establish the principles and to grant the funds, thereby assuming guardianship over national education, national literature, art, science, the formation of academies, museums, galleries, theaters, etc. Such will be the organization of a nation and its central institution. According to Bauer, the Austrian Social Democratic Party is striving, by the creation of these interclass institutions, to make national culture the possession of the whole people, and thereby, quote, unite all the members of the nation into a national cultural community. Stalin's italics. Is that possible? Or is there culture that reflects the bourgeoisie and then culture that reflects the proletariat? One might think that all this concerns Austria alone, but Bauer does not agree. He emphatically declares that national autonomy is essential also for all other states, which, like Austria, consist of several nationalities. In the multinational state, according to Bauer, the working class and all the nations opposes the national power policy of the property classes, with the demand for national autonomy. Then, perceptively, substituting national autonomy for the self-determination of nations, he continues, thus national autonomy, the self-determination of nations, will necessarily become the constitutional program of the proletariat of all the nations in a multinational state. But he goes even further. He profoundly believes that interclass national unions, constituted by him and Springer, will serve as a sort of prototype for a future socialist society. Oh God. Oh dear God. So that's how they got to fascism, huh? You see it going wrong, don't you? You see an ugly future in store for Austria and Germany with that. For he knows that the socialist system of society will divide humanity into nationally delimited communities. That under socialism, there will take place a grouping of humanity into autonomous national communities. And thus, socialist society will undoubtedly present a checkered picture of national unions of persons and territorial corporations. And that, accordingly, the socialist principle of nationality is the highest synthesis of national principle and national autonomy. Enough, it would seem. These are the arguments for cultural national autonomy, as given in the works of Bauer and Springer. The first thing that strikes the eye is the entirely inexplicable and absolutely unjustifiable substitution of national autonomy for self-determination of nations. One or the other. Either Bauer failed to understand the meaning of self-determination, or he did understand it, but for some reason, or other deliberately narrowed his meaning. For there is no doubt, A, that cultural natural autonomy presupposes the integrity of a multinational state, whereas self determination goes outside the framework of this integrity. And B, that self determination endows a nation with complete rights, whereas national autonomy endows it only with cultural rights. That in the first place. In the second place, a combination of internal and external conditions is fully possible at some future time, by virtue of which one or another of the nationalities may decide to secede from the multinational state, say from Austria. Did not Runthian Social Democrats at the Bonn Party Congress announce their readiness to unite with the two parts of their people into one whole? See Proceedings of the Bonn Social Democratic Party Congress. What, in such a case, becomes of the national autonomy, which is inevitable for the proletariat of all nations? What sort of solution of the problem is it that mechanically squeezes nations into the Procrustean bread of an integral state? Further, national autonomy is contrary to the whole course of development of nations. It calls for the organization of nations, but can they artificially welded together if life, if economy development tears whole groups from them and disperses these groups over various regions? There is no doubt that in the early stages of capitalism, nations become welded together. But there is also no doubt that in the higher stages of capitalism, a process of dispersions of nations sets in. A process whereby a whole number of groups separate off from the nations, going off in search of a livelihood and subsequently settling permanently in other regions of the state. In the course of this, these settlers lose their old connections and acquire new habits and new tastes, and possibly a new language. The question arises, is it possible to unite into a single national union groups that have grown so distinct? Where are the magic links to unite what cannot be united? Is it conceivable that Bless me. Bless me, Lord Jesus. Bry, welcome in. This is why Stalin was arguing against Zionism earlier in this very work, by the way. Where are the magic links to unite what cannot be united? Is it conceivable that, for instance, the Germans of the Baltic provinces and the Germans of Transcaucasia can be united into a single nation? But if it is not conceivable and not possible, wherein does national autonomy differ from the utopia of the old nationalists, who endeavored to turn back the wheel of history? But the unity of a nation diminishes not only as a result of migration, it diminishes also from internal causes, owing from the growing acuteness of the class struggle. In the early stages of capitalism, one can still speak of a common culture, of the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. But as large scale industry develops and the class struggle becomes more and more acute, this common culture begins to melt away. One cannot speak seriously of the common culture of a nation when employers and workers of one and the same nation cease to understand one another. What common destiny can there be when the bourgeoisie thirsts for war and the proletariat declares war on war? Can a single inter-class national union be formed from such opposed elements? And after this, can one speak of the union of all members of a nation into a national cultural community? Is it not obvious that national autonomy is contrary to the whole course of the class struggle? But let us assume for a moment that the slogan, organize the nation is practicable. One might understand bourgeois nationalist parliamentarians endeavoring to organize a nation for the purpose of securing additional votes. But since when have social democrats begun to occupy themselves with organizing nations, constituting nations, creating nations? What sort of social democrats are they who, in the epoch of extreme intensification of class struggle, organize interclass national unions? Until now, the Austrian, as well as every other social democratic party, had one task before it, namely, to organize the proletariat. That task has apparently become antiquated. Springer and Bauer are now setting up a new task, a more absorbing task, namely, to create, to organize a nation. However, logic has its obligations. He who adopts national autonomy must also adopt this new task. But to adopt the latter means to abandon the class position and to take the path of nationalism. Springer and Bauer's cultural national autonomy is a subtle form of nationalism. And it is by no means fortuitous that the national program of Austrian Social Democrats enjoins a concern for the preservation and development of national peculiarities of people. Just think, to preserve such national peculiarities of the Transcaucasian Tartars as self-flagellation at the festival of Shahizi Fakhizi, or to develop the national peculiarities of the Georgians as the vendetta. A demand of this character is in place in an outright bourgeois nationalist program. And if it appears in the program of the Austrian Social Democrats, it is because national autonomy tolerates such demands. It does not contradict them. But if national autonomy is unsuitable now, it will be still more unsuitable in the future socialist society. Bauer's prophecy regarding the division of humanity into nationally delimited communities is refuted by the whole course of development of modern human society. National barriers are being demolished and are failing, rather than becoming firmer. As early as the 40s, Marx declared that national differences and antagonisms between peoples are daily more and more vanishing, and that the supremacy of the proletariat will cause them to vanish still further. The subsequent development of mankind, accompanied as it was by the colossal growth of the capitalist production, this reshuffling of nationalities and the union of people within ever larger territories, emphatically confirms Marx's thought. Bauer desires to represent socialist society as a checkered picture of national unions of persons and territorial corporations. Is a timid attempt to substitute for Marx's conception of socialism a revised version of Bakunin's conception. The history of socialism proves that every such attempt to contain the elements of inevitable failure. There is no need to mention the kind of socialist principle of nationality glorified by Bauer, which, in our opinion, substitutes for the socialist principle of class struggle the bourgeois principle of nationality. If national autonomy is based on such a dubious principle, it must be admitted that it can only cause harm to the working class movement. True, such nationalism is not so transparent, for it is skillfully masked by socialist phrases. But it is all the more harmful to the proletariat for that reason. We can always cope with open nationalism, for it can easily be discerned. It is much more difficult to combat nationalism when it is masked and unrecognizable behind its mask. Protected by the armor of socialism, it is less vulnerable and more tenacious. Implanted among the workers, it poisons the atmosphere and spreads harmful ideas of mutual distrust and segregation among the workers of different nationalities. Now, this part here, I actually pointed this out last time. This part here is refuted. Not only parts of it, at least, is refuted later not only by Kim Jong Il but by Stalin himself, which is the idea that nationalism is going to always spread mutual distrust and segregation and be opposed. Yes, yes, indeed. And in fact, the national autonomy that he's advocating for becomes essentially what the proletarian understanding of nationalism becomes with Kim Jong il. I'm actually about to publish on my channel in the next coming days, or maybe in the next week, the reading that I did here last time of Stalin's final speech. You might have been here for that, you might have missed it. I read Stalin's final speech that he ever gave, and I translated it in English, where he explained why historical conditions have changed and that it was up now to the proletariat to take up the banner of nationalism, where the bourgeoisie has now dropped any of even the illusion of nationalism, right? They have dropped it to such the degree that now their nationalism is easily disproven. It's why Nazis even hone in on globalism, right? Globalism is, they see it isn't a thing, but globalization, the raising of corporations and corporate interests above all national interests, is a real thing. That even Marxists who disagree with us and aren't necessarily in the right camp fully, even Marxists, academic Marxists have written about that globalization and what that is, right? So, yeah, Stalin after this, and that's not to take away from anything he's saying here, right? Because the content of what he's saying here is still true. The only thing that changes is the understanding that what he's talking about with national liberation under socialism becomes what we understand as real nationalism today. Yeah, well, here's the thing that Kim Jong Il says, right, Gray, is that not only is bourgeois nationalism problematic, bourgeois nationalism isn't even real. It seemed like it was real, and Stalin even kind of alludes to it in this work when he says that that there was a community of interest with the bourgeoisie and the proletariat in the struggle against feudalism. But that, of course, falls away as the bourgeoisie betray the proletariat and take the ruling position of society, and then need a proletariat to ever exist in order to sustain itself as a class, right? So very quickly, what seemed like there was this coinciding of national interests was never a coinciding of national interests. They actually have no national interests at all. Now we come to realize. With the emergence of monopoly capitalism, the development of imperialism, and how imperialism developed, all prove that they actually have no nationalism. What their nationalism was all along was simply just a cloak for their own capitalist interests, for their own imperial interests. It was the proletariat that created nationalism in order to fight against the feudalism in Europe. There is also masses that created nations without the fight against feudalism in the Americas, right? The First Nations, Mi'kmaq people, the Mohawk people. Those people created nations for a different reason, for the organization and the intercommunication of each other, right? That's why nations were created there. So in both cases, in America and in Europe, nations were created by the people, not by the bourgeoisie. It's just that in that struggle against feudalism, there seemed to be a coinciding of community of interest between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. So it seemed like the bourgeoisie were standing in the van of nationalism, when really they never were. So that's essentially the thing. Like Britain, like Britain today, right? Scotland today. Take any one nation in Britain, in the UK, and you can see how the bourgeoisie of that particular nation will just sell they will sell the nation out. They will not only harm their own people, they will like destroy that nation itself if they can profit from it, right? Whereas whereas the actual national interest of Britain, the national interest, sorry, I should say, of England, are the people themselves, are the workers struggling against those people, struggling against those oppressors. And like, that's reflected, and there's all kinds of like wonderful history of that struggle against those oppressors, right? And the national consciousness that will eventually win over will be a culture based on that national consciousness, right? So that's essentially what you gotta understand about nationalism, I guess, is that it never was like this reactionary concept. That's in a sense a misreading because of the at one time coinciding nature. What we're against is class collaboration. We are against class collaboration. Yeah, good. This is a good one here, and this is a hard conversation. I know, because when you start talking about nationalism, people immediately think of what, right? But we do have to combat that, because most nations, even today, like, are struggling against imperialism, right? And most national, like, all the leaders of the revolution, of the revolutionary communist movement, are national liberation leaders. Chimera says, bourgeois nationalism exhausted its progressive character once the national state had been created and starts functioning as a vehicle for capitalism. Germany exited that phase in the 1800s. Every German nationalism that came after was just a cloak for class collaboration, particularly the subjugation of workers under the banner of National Socialism to the interests of the national imperialist bourgeoisie. Exactly. It's why I do highly recommend. It's a very, very short work, but I read it on stream too. So you can actually read my reading, or listen to my reading of it if you prefer. But you can find Kim Jong-il's work for it right here. It's very short. It's like 9 pages or something. 8 pages. It's 8 pages, and a couple of those pages are the title. So like, and again, this actually demonstrates very well what I love about Kim Jong-il. He's able to take these like concepts, these things about socialism and these very expansive topics, and like distill them down into a very easily understandable thing. Hey, Nabil, welcome in. Everybody go follow Nabil. Like this part. See, right here, this section actually right here is actually really good. He says, nationalism emerged as a progressive idea along with the formation and development of each nation. However, it was understood in the past as an ideology that defends bourgeois interests. It is true that in the days of the nationalist movement against the feudalism, the newly emergent bourgeoisie, upholding the banner of nationalism, stood in the van of the movement. At that time, the interests of both the masses of the people and the newly emergent bourgeoisie seemed basically coincident in their struggle against feudalism. Therefore, the banner of nationalism seemed to reflect the common interests of the nation. As capitalism developed and the bourgeoisie became the reactionary ruling class after the victorious bourgeois revolutions in various countries, nationalism was used as a means of defending the interests of the bourgeois class. The bourgeoisie disguised their class interests as national interests and used nationalism as an ideological instrument for solidifying their domination. This led nationalism to be understood among the people as a bourgeois ideology that runs counter to national interests. We should distinguish clearly between true nationalism that loves the people, that loves the nation and defends its interests. And by nation, that's why I said the people. And bourgeois nationalism that advocates the interests of the bourgeois class. Bourgeois nationalism reveals itself as national egoism, national exclusivism, and big power chauvinism in the relationship between countries and nations. It is reactionary in that it creates antagonisms and disagreements between countries and nations, and checks the development of friendly relations between the various peoples of the world. And then he just says, it is wrong to view communism as incompatible with nationalism. Communism does not advocate only the interests of the working class. Right there is beautiful. Right there. This is the key. Right here, sorry, it's just every time I read this, even though it's only 7 pages, I always get something new from it. Right there is the key thing. Right here, I want to read this part again. It is wrong to view communism as incompatible with nationalism. Communism does not advocate only the interests of the working class. True. The working class ideology is the leader. But we advocate the interests of the nation, the masses, the people, right? Because we advocate the interests of the broad masses of people, we advocate the nation, we advocate the people, we advocate the country. Nationalism is also an ideology of loving the country and the people, as it defends the interests of the country and the nation. Love of the country and the people is an ideological emotion common to both communism and nationalism. And herein lies the ideological basis on which they can ally with one another. Therefore, there is no reason or ground to pit one against the other. So there, just a little side note there for you. Comradesky, great to see you. Oh, they've always done that, Nabil. That's their tired old trick. Look, we can even see our man Joey Steele complaining about that. This right here, to me, this applies to every single progressive, insurgent, democratic, socialist candidate that they cart out and tell me that I should actually donate money to or something. Yeah. I'm not lying when I say there was Canadian streamer. I'm not naming any names, but there was a Canadian streamer who was raising money for a Florida DSA candidate. I don't care how good your DSA candidate is. I'm not raising no money for them. The DSA does not need our money, I guarantee you. Right? There's lots of other people in Canada who need money. Specifically, Indigenous people on the land you're probably on. You know? Maybe look into that. Maybe look into the indigenous struggles on the land you occupy and don't send fucking money to. But I mean, no, I'm just joking. I'm just joking because that's democratic socialism for you. But it is why I say social democrats or democratic socialists, they're Democrats, okay? They think they're socialists. That's cute. They align with us morally, but we have to realize that there is a complete disconnect between what they want, what they morally align with, and what they actually understand. You know, what they materially and practically fight for. And that becomes the disconnect. And that's why, like, for us at the end of the day, it don't matter how, because for us it doesn't matter how many insurgent candidates you get into the DNC. It will always be a reactionary organization because any reform under capitalism, especially in the U.S. imperialist core, strengthens the capitalist system as a whole. Stalin's take right here is great and speaks to that, I think. The bourgeois Democrats have always advanced and still advance all sorts of slogans in order to deceive the people. The point is to test their sincerity, to compare their words with their deeds, not to be satisfied with idealistic or charlatan phrases, but to get down to the class reality. And that's why I say Russia and DPRK is a litmus test for leftists because it actually it shows you the democratic socialist from the actual socialist, in my experience. That defense, that solidarity. And I'll work in a broad coalition with DSA members or whoever else, NDP here, but I will not ever shy away from explaining that I'm against the reformist and entryist strategy, whether it's NDP or DSA. Anyway, sorry for that sidetrack. I will now continue where I read. But this does not exhaust the harm caused by national autonomy. It prepares the ground not only for segregation of nations, but also for breaking up a united labor movement. The idea of national autonomy creates the psychological conditions for the division of the United Workers' Party into separate parties built on national lines. Now that part there is actually kind of true, and why we want to keep it as together as possible. That's why I don't support the. That's why I don't support secession per se, but as principle I do. You know. Do you support the right of Donbass, Luhansk, and Crimea to secede from Ukraine? Me one-shotting the average leftist. Yeah, I mean, Chimera. That's to me. That is especially a big litmus test, right? Yeah, Mac. Absolutely. Because even the people who weren't Nazis, even the people who weren't Russian speakers, were being subjected to fucking shells that the Ukrainian army was dropping on them. And even those people have faced less shelling since the Russian occupation during this special military operation. And again, if you just portray Donbass, like, look, this take might make me really unpopular, okay? But if you portray, yes, exactly, which is why Russian occupation of Donbass has actually been good for the people of Donbass. But the thing that makes it unpopular, or I guess what makes me it's like it's more than that as well, right? The thing that makes me unpopular is when I say, like, Donbass, it's not so clear cut and dry that belongs to Ukraine as an independent country. Okay? So that's my unpopular take. Donbass region, not necessarily the most like justifiable thing as being a part of Ukrainian territory to begin with, if we're being real. That was something that really happened with Khrushchev. And again, and then, I mean, you want to go back far enough and you realize they are essentially one and the same people, right? Like, that's not against Ukrainian national autonomy, but they were one and the same people. Yes, yeah, yeah. Recognizing Donbass as historically a Russian region is absolutely an unpopular take. Yeah, big time. Especially here. Most of our friends on the left, like, one reason we formed TankTube, which is the stream team that I helped to create, one of the founding members of, big reason why we created that stream team was because, like, all of our friends on the left have such wrong opinions on everything from Russia to, whatever else. But Russia was a big one. And we wanted to like have a team that was kind of like the bread tube, but an officially constituted group where whether when you go to any one of them, you know that we're all gonna like be aligned on those questions, right? The Soviet premiers kind of tacked shit onto Ukrainian SSR. No, Crimea was never socially, culturally, historically a part of Ukraine before the 50s. Yeah, RT. And same with Donbass. That's why I say Donbass, Crimea, they were never really historically like Ukrainian territory per se, right? And the reason why it wasn't a big deal with Khrushchev is, like I've said before, is because it was the same country. It was all part of the USSR. So you could move freely between them. There was no separation with it becoming Ukraine. You know? It was essentially like at the time seen as like a recognition of the Ukrainian speaking minority there. But again, yeah. But then that balloons into something else later on with the 90s and the overthrow. Because what they used to overthrow the USSR was focusing in on that. Yeah, it was Russia before it was Ukraine. Yeah, and I mean, again, if you go back far enough, they're the same people, and they're not the national differences arises out of the like Stalin says, the socio-historical peculiarities that arise, right? Other than that, they are the same people, and they recognize themselves as the same people generally. Other than really reactionary white supremacists in Ukraine, they're the ones who deny that, and they take like a fascist kind of like quasi science history of trying to like discover where the true Ukrainians came from outside of that socio historical development, which we know that's how nations form, socially and historically, right? Ukrainian fascists like Nazis before them want to prove it on like biological grounds or whatever the fuck. To continue, Austria, the home of national autonomy, provides the most deplorable example of this. I agree with what you're saying, and also hypocritical of any Western nation to say anything bad about any anti imperialist nation with how much pain the West has brought on anyone. Yeah. And that's why it's like on Westerners to study that shit, right? Yep. I mean, that's what fascists do, Mac. That unfortunately, that's what they love to do. It's partly why they reject Donbass independence on those grounds, in fact. Yep. Yep. Like again, it's not actually a stretch of language or like being funny or whatever to say that the Russian special military operation does have an anti-fascist character to it. Now again, go say that to any fucking DSA member on this platform and see what happens to you. I'm telling you. Any of our friends on the left on this platform, outside of TankTube, you go and ask them and you'll see what happens. I don't actually recommend it because you'll get dogpiled, but If you don't mind getting dogpiled, you test the waters and you'll see. Austria. Ask him what I just said about Russia being the Russian special military operation having an anti-fascist content to it, having an anti-fascist character. The military operation in Ukraine has an anti-fascist character. Say that to any one of our friends on the left, like I'm saying, and see what happens in chat to you. Anyone with a sizable audience, and I will almost guarantee you will get dogpiled by a bunch of people in the West that will be going, "Are you some kind of Putinist? Russia's the biggest fascist country that ever, that's it." Somehow one of the only countries that have actually fought against fascism is one of the most fascist countries in the world. Make it fucking make sense. China and Russia, the countries that fought against fascism more than anyone else, lost 20 million people each doing it. But yeah, oh yeah, they're the most fascist country in the world. Give me a fucking break, come on. It doesn't even make logical sense. It's anti-fascist and also anti-imperialist. The latter is definitely the larger aspect, but yes. Yeah, absolutely. Which is why DPRK participated. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's great. It's anti-imperialist as well. It's fighting against NATO. Even if you just say they're not imperialists, yeah, you will get dogpiled for that as well. Because big country equals imperialism, of course. Yeah, Russia's not imperialist. Everybody will jump on top of you. China lost 20 million and USSR lost about 27 million. Thank you, Strin. All right. We will finish up this part and then we will continue next week with part 5. Austria, the home of national autonomy, provides the most deplorable examples of this. As early as 1897, the Wimberg Party Congress at the Vienna Congress. It was called the Wimberg Conference after the name of the hotel in which it was held. The Austrian Social Democratic Party from June 6th to 12th. Sorry, what year was that? 1897. The once united Austrian Social Democratic Party began to break up into separate parties. The breakup became still the more marked after the Brunn Congress 1899, which adopted the national autonomy. Matters have finally come to such a pass that in place of the United National Party, there are now 6 national parties, of which the Czech Social Democratic Party will not even have anything to do with the German Social Democratic Party. But with the parties are associated with the trade unions, in Austria, both the parties and the trade unions. The main brunt of the work is borne by the same social democratic workers. There was therefore reason to fear that separatism in the party would lead to separatism in the trade unions, and that the trade unions would also break up. That, in fact, is what happened. The trade unions have also divided according to nationality. Now things frequently go so far that the Czech workers will even break a strike of German workers, or will unite at municipal elections with the Czech bourgeois against the German workers. It will be seen from the foregoing that cultural national autonomy is no solution to the national question. Not only that, it serves to aggravate and confuse the question by creating a situation which favors the destruction of unity of the labor movement, fosters the segregation of the workers according to nationality, and intensifies friction among them. Such is the harvest of national autonomy.